Alia was just like any other 19-year-old trying to find her place in the world. She wasn't rich, she wasn't famous, but she had something that kept her going: hope. Hope for a better future. Hope for a life where she could take care of herself and maybe even inspire others along the way. Growing up in a small Midwest town hadn't been easy, especially as one of the few black kids in a mostly white community. But Alia didn't let that stop her. She worked hard, stayed focused, and dreamed big. When she got accepted into college, it felt like a miracle. It wasn't some fancy Ivy League school. It was a modest university a few hours away from home. Still, it meant everything to her. For the first time, she felt like she was stepping into a world full of possibilities. Sure, she had to juggle 2 jobs while studying, but she didn't mind. Every late night spent working at the cafe or tutoring younger students felt worth it because she knew she was building a foundation for her dreams. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One day, while sitting in her dorm room cramming for an exam, Alia noticed something odd. Her body felt different, tired all the time, nauseous for no reason, and her clothes weren't fitting quite right anymore. At first, she brushed it off as stress. College was tough after all. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. It wasn't until she bought a pregnancy test on a whim that reality hit her like a ton of bricks. The little stick showed 2 lines, clear as day. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind over and over again. How could this happen? What would people say? Would she have to drop out of school? Her mind raced with questions, fears, and worst-case scenarios. For days, Alia kept the news to herself, unsure of how to process it. She cried in the shower, avoided calls from her family back home, and tried to act normal around her classmates. But secrets don't stay hidden for long, especially in a place as small as her campus. Someone must have seen her buying prenatal vitamins at the store or noticed the changes in her behavior. Whatever it was, word spread quickly. Before she knew it, whispers followed her everywhere she went. At first, it was subtle, a snicker here, a sideways glance there. Then came the comments. Isn't she a little young to be having a baby? Someone muttered loud enough for her to hear. Another person joked about how irresponsible she must be. The jokes turned into rumors, and the rumors turned into outright bullying. A group of girls from her dorm took particular pleasure in making her life miserable. They'd leave nasty notes on her door, call her names in the hallways, and mock her whenever they saw her in class. One afternoon, things escalated. Alia was walking back to her dorm after a long day of classes when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around to see 3 girls from her floor following her. Their leader, a tall blonde named Claire, stepped forward with a smirk plastered across her face. So, Claire said, crossing her arms, when's the baby daddy coming back to take responsibility? Or does he even know? Alia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to say something clever, something brave, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stood there, clutching her books tightly, feeling smaller than she ever had before. Oh, what's wrong? Cat got your tongue? Claire teased, her friends giggling behind her. You really thought you could just waltz in here, get knocked up, and still act like you're better than everyone else? The insults kept coming, each one cutting deeper than the last. By the time they walked away, leaving Alia standing alone in the hallway, tears were streaming down her face. She felt defeated, like the entire world was against her. But what scared her most was the realization that she didn't know how to fight back. She didn't want to involve her family. They had their own struggles, but keeping quiet wasn't helping either. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Alia made a decision. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in months. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hello? Dad, Aaliyah whispered, her voice trembling. "I need you." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a soft sigh. "Tell me everything," her dad said, his tone calm but firm. And so she did. She told him about the bullying, the loneliness, the fear that had been eating away at her for weeks. As she spoke, she could almost picture him sitting there, listening intently, his jaw tightening with every word. By the time she finished, she was crying again. But this time, it wasn't just sadness, it was relief. Because her dad wasn't just any man. He was someone who commanded respect wherever he went. Someone who had spent years protecting others, serving his country, and teaching people the value of honor and integrity. If anyone could fix this mess, it was him. "I'll be there tomorrow," he said simply, his voice steady and reassuring. "Hang in there, sweetheart. This isn't over yet." And for the first time in weeks, Aaliyah believed him. The moment Aaliyah hung up the phone, a strange mix of emotions washed over her. Relief, fear, and even a little bit of guilt. She hated involving her dad in her problems. He already carried so much weight on his shoulders, but she also knew he wouldn't hesitate to drop everything for her. That's just who he was, a protector, a fighter. Someone who didn't back down when things got tough. The next morning, as Aaliyah walked to her early class, she couldn't stop thinking about what her dad might do once he arrived. Would he confront the bullies directly? Talk to the school? Administration? Or would he come up with some clever plan that only he could pull off? Whatever it was, she trusted him completely. But part of her worried too. What if things got worse because of his involvement? What if people found out who he really was? By midday, her phone buzzed. It was a text from him. Asterisk landed. "Be there. Soon." Asterisk, just 4 words, but they made her heart race. He was here. Her dad, the man who had taught her how to ride a bike, helped her with homework late into the night, and always told her she was capable of anything, was about to step into her chaotic world. When she finally saw him walking toward her outside the library, she almost ran to him. He looked exactly the same as she remembered, tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm demeanor that somehow radiated strength. His eyes softened the moment he saw her, and without saying a word, he pulled her into a tight hug. For a few seconds, everything else faded away. The bullying, the stress, the uncertainty, it all disappeared in the safety of his embrace. "You okay?" he asked gently, pulling back to look at her. She nodded, though tears were already welling up in her eyes. "I am now." They sat together on a bench near the quad, and Aaliyah filled him in on every detail she hadn't mentioned over the phone. She described the girls who tormented her, their cruel comments, the way they laughed at her expense. She showed him screenshots of hateful messages she'd received online and recounted the incident in the hallway where Claire and her friends cornered her. Her dad listened silently, his expression unreadable but his hands gripping the edge of the bench tightly. When she finished, he took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. "All right," he said, his voice steady but tinged with anger. "Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to document everything. Every message, every comment, every time someone says something nasty to you. Write it down or take screenshots." "We need proof." Aaliyah blinked, surprised by his practical approach. "Why?" "Because we're not playing games here," he explained. "This isn't just about teaching these kids a lesson. It's about making sure they can't hurt you or anyone else again. If we go to the school with solid evidence, they'll have no choice but to act." She nodded, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. "Okay, I can do that." Her dad leaned closer, his tone softening. "And second, let me handle this my way. Trust me, sweetheart. I've dealt with situations far worse than this. These girls won't know what hit them." Later that evening, her dad checked into a nearby hotel under a fake name. He didn't want anyone connecting him to Alia right away, not until he figured out his next move. Over dinner, he asked her questions about campus life, the dynamics between students, and which teachers seemed supportive. She answered honestly, realizing how observant he was. He wasn't just gathering information. He was piecing together a strategy. The next morning, he put his plan into motion. Dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, he headed to the university's administration building. There, he introduced himself as a visiting professional invited to give a guest lecture on leadership and teamwork. Thanks to a quick call to an old military buddy who happened to work in academia, he secured permission to speak to a group of students later that week. As he toured the campus, pretending to familiarize himself with the layout, he kept a close eye on the students around him. He noticed cliques forming in the cafeteria, whispered conversations stopping abruptly when someone passed by, and the unmistakable tension between certain groups. It reminded him of missions overseas where understanding the environment was key to success. That evening, he met up with Alia again. They sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by textbooks and half-empty coffee cups. She watched nervously as he spread papers across the table, a map of the campus, notes from their earlier conversations, and a list of names she'd reluctantly provided. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said, tapping the map. "This is going to get messy before it gets better. But I promise you, by the time I leave, those girls will regret ever messing with you." "What are you planning?" she asked hesitantly. He smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Let's just say I'm going to teach them a lesson they won't forget, and maybe remind the entire campus what respect looks like." Over the next couple of days, her dad immersed himself in campus life. He attended lectures, chatted with professors, and struck up casual conversations with students. To everyone else, he seemed like just another visitor passing through. But Alia knew better. Every interaction, every observation was part of his larger plan. On the day of his lecture, the auditorium was packed. Students filed in curiously, eager to hear what this mysterious guest speaker had to say. When he stepped onto the stage, his presence commanded attention immediately. He wasn't flashy or overly charismatic, but there was something about him, an aura of authority that made people sit up straight and listen. He began by sharing stories from his years of service, carefully omitting any classified details, but painting vivid pictures of resilience, courage, and integrity. He talked about leading teams through impossible situations, standing up against injustice, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The room was silent, captivated by his words. Then he shifted gears. "Now, let me ask you something," he said, pacing slowly across the stage. "What happens when someone picks on the wrong person? When they underestimate who they're dealing with? Let me tell you, it never ends well." His gaze swept over the audience, lingering briefly on a cluster of girls sitting near the front. One of them, Claire, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, though she likely didn't realize why she suddenly felt uneasy. "Respect isn't given freely," he continued. "It's earned. And disrespect has consequences. Sometimes those consequences come quietly behind the scenes. Other times, they're loud and undeniable. Either way, they always catch up to you." The room erupted into applause when he finished speaking, but Alia noticed something interesting. Several students glanced nervously at Claire and her friends, as if sensing that his words carried a hidden meaning. Even Claire herself looked pale, clutching her notebook tightly. Afterward, her dad mingled with students, shaking hands and answering questions. Alia stood off to the side, watching him work his magic. She couldn't help but feel a surge of pride and relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt like she had the upper hand, but she also knew the hardest part was yet to come. because while her dad's lecture sent a clear message, the real confrontation was still looming. And when it happened, it would change everything for Aaliyah, for the Bullies, and for the entire campus. The days after her dad's lecture felt like a strange calm before the storm. Aaliyah went about her routine attending classes, working part-time at the cafe, and spending quiet evenings studying in her apartment, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something big was coming. Her dad had been unusually quiet since his speech, often disappearing for hours at a time. When he did return, he'd scribble notes on scraps of paper or make cryptic phone calls in hushed tones. One evening, as they sat together eating takeout pizza, Aaliyah finally broke the silence. "Dad, what's going on? You've got this." "Look," he chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. "What kind of look?" "The I'm up to something look," she said, pointing her slice of pizza at him. "You're planning something, aren't you?" Her dad smirked, clearly enjoying the suspense. "Let's just say I'm laying the groundwork. Those girls need to understand who they're dealing with. But don't worry, they'll get their chance to figure it out soon enough." Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly are you going to do that?" "You'll see," he replied cryptically, tapping the side of his nose. "Just trust me." The next morning, things started to heat up. Claire and her crew were sitting in the student lounge when one of them pulled out her phone, scrolling through social media. Suddenly, she gasped loudly, holding the screen up for everyone to see. It was a photo, a grainy but unmistakable shot of Claire laughing during a group project while whispering something into another girl's ear. The caption read, "Asterisk, caught red-handed bullying a pregnant classmate. Is this the behavior we want? Representing our university?" Asterisk Claire's face turned bright red as her friends scrambled to check their own phones. Within minutes, the post had gone viral not just among students but across campus forums and even local news outlets. Comments poured in, some defending Claire and others tearing her apart. But what shocked Claire most was the source of the leak. Someone had anonymously sent screenshots of private messages between her and her friends, detailing cruel plans to humiliate Aaliyah further. Panic set in as Claire realized the gravity of the situation. She tried deleting her accounts, blocking people, anything to stop the flood of backlash. But it was too late. By lunchtime, whispers followed her wherever she went. Even professors gave her sideways glances during lectures. Meanwhile, Aaliyah stayed out of the spotlight, focusing on her studies and avoiding drama. But she wasn't oblivious to the chaos swirling around her. Students she barely knew started approaching her in hallways, offering support or simply saying, "I'm sorry this happened to you." For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of solidarity rather than isolation. That afternoon, her dad called her into his hotel room. He was seated at the small desk, surrounded by papers and open tabs on his laptop. "Phase 1 is complete," he announced triumphantly. "Now comes Phase 2, Aaliyah frowned. "What does that mean?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It means it's time for me to have a little chat with Miss Claire herself." Later that evening, Claire found herself alone near the library, heading back to her dorm after a long day of dodging stares and angry comments. Just as she rounded a corner, a shadow stepped into her path. Startled, she looked up and froze. Standing there was Aaliyah's dad, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "Can I help you?" Claire stammered, gripping her backpack. "Straps tightly." "I think the question is whether you can help yourself," he replied calmly, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk." Claire glanced around nervously, but the hallway was deserted. "About what?" "You know exactly what," he said, taking a step closer. "Let's not waste time pretending otherwise. You've been bullying my daughter for no reason other than your own insecurity and cruelty. And now, Thanks to your actions, you've painted yourself into a very uncomfortable corner." Claire's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I didn't mean." "Save it," he interrupted sharply. "I don't care about excuses. What I care about is making sure this stops. Permanently." She swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. "Please, I'll apologize. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't ruin my life." Her dad studied her for a moment, letting the weight of her fears sink in. Then he spoke again, his tone softer but still firm. "Here's the deal. If I hear so much as a whisper of disrespect directed at my daughter or anyone else, you'll regret it. Not because I'll physically harm you, but because I'll make sure every single person in your life knows exactly who you are and what you've done. Do you understand?" Claire nodded furiously, her hands shaking. Yes, I understand." "Good," he said, stepping aside to let her pass. "Now go home and think about how you're going to fix this mess you've created." Back at her apartment, Aaliyah waited anxiously for her dad to return. When he finally walked through the door, his expression was grim but satisfied. "It's done," he told her simply. "She won't bother you again." Aaliyah stared at him, wide-eyed. "What did you say to her?" "Enough to scare her straight," he replied with a faint smile. "She needed to realize that actions have consequences. And now she knows." Over the next few days, the transformation on campus was undeniable. Claire and her friends avoided Aaliyah completely, keeping their heads down whenever she passed by. Other students began treating her differently too, not with pity, but with respect. Some even apologized for not standing up for her sooner, but perhaps the biggest change was in Aaliyah herself. With each passing day, she felt stronger, more confident. Her dad's presence had reminded her of something important. She wasn't alone. And while she appreciated everything he'd done for her, she also knew it was time to take back control of her own life. One evening, as they sat together watching TV, Aaliyah turned to him with a determined look. "Dad, thank you for everything. But I think it's time for me to handle things from here." He smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "I was wondering when you'd say that. Remember, sweetheart, strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about facing your fears head on. And you've got plenty of strength inside you." As he hugged her tightly, Aaliyah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she truly believed she could handle whatever came her way. The days following her dad's confrontation with Claire felt surreal for Aaliyah. It was as if the campus had collectively held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The tension that once hung thick in the air seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a cautious sense of calm. But Aaliyah knew better than to let her guard down completely. Change didn't happen overnight, especially not in places where old habits and attitudes ran deep. Her dad stayed on campus for a few more days, keeping a low profile but always nearby just in case. He encouraged Aaliyah to document every interaction, good or bad, and reminded her to stay vigilant. "People might act nice now because they're scared," he told her one evening over coffee, "but we need to make sure this sticks. Respect isn't something you can force. It has to be earned." Aaliyah nodded, appreciating his wisdom. Still, she couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. On one hand, she was relieved that the bullying had stopped or at least paused. On the other hand, she wondered how long it would last. Would Claire and her friends eventually go back to their old ways once her dad left? Or worse, would they find new targets? Her fears weren't unfounded. One afternoon, while walking to class, Aaliyah noticed a group of students whispering near the bulletin board. At first, she thought nothing of it. It wasn't unusual for people to gossip, but then she caught snippets of their conversation. "Her dad is some kind of military guy. Yeah, apparently he threatened Claire. No wonder she's been so quiet lately." Alia froze mid-step, her heart pounding. She hadn't realized word about her dad's involvement had spread so quickly. While part of her felt a flicker of satisfaction knowing that people were talking about him and not her, it also worried her. What if this only made things worse? What if Claire decided to retaliate? She hurried to her next class, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. As she sat down in her seat, another student leaned over and whispered, "Hey, are you okay?" "I heard what happened with those girls. That was messed up." Alia blinked, surprised by the unexpected show of support. Thanks," she stammered. "I'm just trying to focus on school right now." "Well, if anyone gives you trouble, again, let me know," the student said firmly before turning back to their notes. It wasn't the first time someone had offered help recently. Since her dad's intervention, several classmates, some she barely knew, had reached out to express solidarity. A few even apologized for not speaking up earlier when the bullying started. It was humbling, really, to see people stepping forward. After so much silence, that night, Alia called her dad to share what was happening. "It's weird," she admitted. "People are being nicer to me all of a sudden. Like, way nicer than before. Some of them even apologized." Her dad chuckled softly. "Good. That means my little talk got through to more than just Claire. Sometimes, all it takes is showing people there are consequences for their actions. But what happens when you leave?" Alia asked hesitantly. "What if they forget everything once you're gone?" "They won't," he assured her. "Because you're going to keep standing tall, no matter what. You've already shown incredible strength, sweetheart. Don't lose sight of that." By the end of the week, her dad announced it was time for him to head home. His presence had served its purpose, and staying longer risked drawing too much attention. Before leaving, he gave Alia one final piece of advice: speak up for yourself. Don't wait for others to fight your battles. Use your voice. It's powerful. As he hugged her goodbye, Alia promised herself she'd do exactly that. She owed it to herself and to her baby to live without fear. Life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible. Claire kept her distance, avoiding eye contact whenever their paths crossed. Her friends followed suit, scattering like leaves in the wind whenever Alia entered a room. Word around campus was that Claire had transferred to another school, though no one confirmed it officially. Either way, the absence of her toxic influence made a noticeable difference. For Alia, the real challenge lay in navigating the aftermath. People treated her differently now, not just with kindness, but with curiosity. Some admired her resilience. Others seemed intimidated by her newfound confidence. Professors who once ignored her struggles began offering extra support, praising her determination to continue her education despite everything. One day, during a particularly tough anatomy exam, Alia found herself struggling to focus. Her mind wandered to thoughts of her growing belly, her future plans, and the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. Just as frustration bubbled up inside her, a classmate tapped her gently on the arm and slid a note across the desk. Asterisk, you've got this. Asterisk tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she forced herself to smile instead. For the first time in months, she truly believed those words. She did have this. As weeks turned into months, Alia embraced her role as an advocate for herself and for others. When she overheard rumors about a freshman being teased for wearing hand-me-down clothes, she stepped in, reminding everyone how it felt to be judged unfairly. When a professor dismissed a pregnant student's concerns in class, Alia raised her hand and politely challenged the oversight. Slowly but surely, she became a voice for change, inspiring others to stand up against injustice. Her dad kept tabs on her progress from afar, calling regularly to check in. Each time, he sounded prouder than the last. "You're doing amazing, sweetheart," he told her during one call. I always knew you could handle anything life threw at you." Alia smiled, rubbing her belly absent-mindedly. "Thanks, Dad. But honestly, I couldn't have done it without you." "You did," he corrected gently. "I just gave you a push. Everything else is all you." By the time graduation rolled around, Alia walked across the stage holding her diploma in one hand and her toddler in the other. Cheers erupted from the crowd as she posed for photos, beaming brighter than ever before. Among the sea of faces, she spotted her dad standing near the back, clapping louder than anyone else. His eyes glistened with pride as their gazes met, afterward. As they celebrated together, Alia pulled him aside for a private moment. "Dad," she said softly, "thank you for everything. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For teaching me that strength comes from within." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "Always remember, sweetheart, no matter where life takes you, you'll never face it alone. Not while I'm here." And for the first time in years, Alia truly believed him. Graduation day was supposed to be the happiest moment of Alia's life, and in many ways it was. But as she stood on stage holding her diploma in one hand and her 2-year-old son in the other, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she'd come. It wasn't just about surviving the past few years. It was about thriving despite everything that had tried to knock her down. Her little boy, dressed in a tiny suit with a bow tie slightly crooked, grinned up at her as if he knew this was a big deal. The crowd erupted into applause, cheering not just for her academic achievements, but also for her resilience. Friends, professors, and even strangers who had once turned their backs now looked at her with admiration. She scanned the audience until her eyes landed on her dad, standing tall near the back, clapping louder than anyone else. His smile said it all. You did it. Afterward, during the reception, people approached her to congratulate her. Some apologized, again for not stepping in sooner when she needed support. Others thanked her for speaking out and inspiring them to do better. One professor admitted, "You reminded us all why we're here to lift students up, not tear them down." Hearing those words brought tears to Alia's eyes. For so long, she had felt invisible, like no one cared. Now, she realized her journey had touched more lives than she ever imagined. Later that evening, after the celebrations died down, Alia sat with her dad at a quiet cafe off campus. They ordered coffee and pie, savoring the simple pleasure of being together without distractions. As they talked, her dad leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "So," he began, stirring sugar into his cup, "what's next for you?" Alia hesitated, glancing at her sleeping toddler nestled in his stroller beside her. "I've been thinking about grad school," she admitted. "There's still so much I want to learn, so many ways I can make a difference." Her dad nodded approvingly. "That's my girl. Always reaching higher. But it won't be easy," she added quickly. "Raising him while studying full-time, it's going to take everything I've got. And you'll handle it," he said firmly, "because you've already proven you can handle anything. Remember what I told you? Strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up every time you do." She smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. Her dad wasn't just her protector. He was her biggest cheerleader. He believed in her when she doubted herself, and his faith gave her the courage to keep pushing forward. As summer rolled around, Alia started preparing for the next chapter of her life. She applied to graduate programs, secured financial aid, and even found a daycare center close to campus where her son could spend his days learning and playing. Every step felt monumental, like she was building a bridge between her past struggles and her future dreams. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes in their new apartment near the university, she stumbled upon an old journal. Flipping through its pages, she found entries from her darkest days, the nights when she cried herself to sleep, wondering if she'd made a mistake keeping her baby. There were angry scribbles about the bullies, desperate prayers for strength, and promises to herself that she wouldn't give up. Reading those words now, Alia felt a lump rise in her throat. She had come so far since then. Back then, she had been scared, uncertain, and alone. Now she was stronger, wiser, and surrounded by people who loved her. Closing the journal, she tucked it away, vowing to write a new story, one filled with hope, purpose, and triumph. The first semester of grad school was challenging, but Alia thrived under pressure. Her classmates respected her determination, often turning to her for advice or encouragement. Professors praised her ability to balance motherhood with academics, calling her an inspiration to everyone around her. Even her toddler became a beloved fixture on campus, toddling alongside her during breaks and charming everyone he met. But perhaps the most rewarding part of her journey was seeing how much she had grown, not just as a student or a mother, but as a person. She no longer shied away from challenges. Instead, she faced them head-on, armed with the lessons her dad had taught her. When someone suggested she couldn't juggle school and parenting, she proved them wrong. When another mom confided in her about struggling with judgmental comments, Alia shared her own story, offering comfort and solidarity. Her advocacy work expanded too. She joined a campus organization focused on supporting single parents pursuing higher education. Together, they hosted workshops, fundraisers, and mentorship programs aimed at breaking down barriers for others in similar situations. Slowly but surely, Alia became a beacon of hope, a living testament to the power of perseverance. Months turned into years, and before she knew it, Alia was standing on yet another stage, this time receiving her master's degree. Her son, now 5 years old, cheered loudly from the front row, clutching a handmade sign that read, "We're so proud of Mommy." Her dad, sitting beside him, wiped away tears as he watched his daughter achieve something neither of them had dared to dream about during her darkest days. After the ceremony, Alia hugged her family tightly, overwhelmed with emotion. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to her dad. "I'm going to keep fighting for me, for Ma'am, and for everyone else who needs someone to stand up for them." Her dad squeezed her shoulder, his voice thick with pride. "That's my girl. Keep shining, sweetheart. The world needs more light like yours." Years later, Alia would look back on her journey and marvel at how everything had unfolded. What started as a nightmare had transformed into a legacy of resilience, compassion, and change. She hadn't just survived the bullying or the hardships of young motherhood. She had risen above them, using her experiences to inspire others. And though her dad eventually returned to his duties overseas, his presence remained a constant source of strength in her life. Whenever doubt crept in, she remembered his words, "You're capable of anything." Those 6 words carried her through every challenge, every victory, and every dream she dared to chase. In the end, Alia's story wasn't just about overcoming adversity. It was about finding purpose in pain, courage in fear, and love in the face of hate. And as she walked toward her future, hand in hand with her son, she knew one thing for certain: she was unstoppable.